That was way far away.
But when I start out, I have not thought this. Oh.
People know you're not famous. You're not famous at that point.
Hi, Joe. How are you tonight?
I'm doing
Nice to see you. Thank you for being here tonight with us.
I'm just thinking after the last time you and I want to see your one?
Oh, I got the same one.
Yeah, but you're standing there.
What in the world? And the cat's watching the TV.
Yeah, right.
I know. I laughed so hard about it. Okay.
I sent it
Well,
to my daughter.
did you? Yeah, I sent it mine to my kids too. Yeah. My daughter loves cats. So I sent it to her, and she's like, "Really, Dad?"
Well, I'm foster pets
Oh,
staff, and I have
funny.
also a hospice foster
Oh my gosh.
staff, and so it was like so perfect.
That is too funny. That is too funny. Okay.
Okay,
Got it?
got it. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Wow, that's loud. So my name is Matt Pontus. In addition to serving as the Assistant County Executive Officer, I'm also leading Santa Barbara County's recovery efforts. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our ASL Spanish interpreters. This is Joe Black with the Independent Living Resource Center. And we have Simone Revidentia. You're going to have to help me with that. Revidentia over here as well. So welcome.
Hi, my name is Simone Rivadeneira, and I will be providing simultaneous interpretation into Spanish today. So if you need interpretation equipment, it's over at the back table, and I can help you out. A few guidelines for working with an interpreter. Please remember to speak in a clear, loud voice and at a moderate pace. This is the sign if I need you to slow down. And this is the sign if I need you to speak up, but since we have microphones, that probably won't be a problem. Hola, soy Simone Rivadeneira y voy a proveer interpretación simultánea a español. Si necesitas un equipo, está ahí atrás en la mesa y te puedo ayudar. Algunas guías cuando trabajando con un intérprete, por favor, hablan a un paso moderado y alto. Si necesito que hablen más lento, voy a hacer esto. Y si necesito que suban su voz, voy a hacer esto. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you. So as I said, I'm Matt Pontus, and I'm leading the efforts for the recovery. And I'm going to be working with you on this together as we find our new normal. This is a concept you're going to hear a lot about tonight as we move forward. For each of you here in the Carpinteria Summerlin area, it's a different normal than in Montecito and Northern Goleta. But the fact is that any significant rain that comes this way means that you'll have to take some specific actions for yourself and your loved ones. So thank you for being here tonight and being engaged and learning and hopefully asking a lot of questions about all that you hear tonight and in the future meetings that we'll have together. You'll be seeing us regularly, and you'll be receiving information from the county in many different settings. Before we get into the program, I'd like to recognize some key individuals here tonight. Please hold your applause as I list these local leaders for you. We have Dave Durfingler from the city of Carpinteria. There's Dave. We've got Fred Shaw, Carpinteria Mayor. We've got Samantha Omana from Assembly Member Limone's office. We've got Wendy Mota from Congressman Carvajal's office. We have Mona Miyasato, our CEO for the Santa Barbara County. And we have Supervisor Doss Williams, First District Supervisor. I would now like to introduce our speakers for this evening. First, Doss Williams, First District Supervisor. Your Mayor, Fred Shaw. We have Ray Navarro, Fire Chief for the Carpinteria Summerlin Fire Protection District. Rob Lewin, the Director of Santa Barbara County's Office of Emergency Management. Kevin Taylor, the Deputy Fire Chief for the Montecito Fire Protection District. We have Sheriff Coroner Bill Brown from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office. We have Lieutenant Steve Larson from the California Highway Patrol. We have Deputy Director of the county's Public Works Department and Flood Control District, Tom Favrum. And we have Dr. Charity Dean, the Public Health Officer for Santa Barbara County. Standing by to respond to any questions regarding agricultural impacts is our Ag Commissioner, Kathy Fisher. And we have representatives from FEMA and the California Office of Emergency Services, City of Carpinteria staff, and others. And if you have questions towards the end, please come up to the microphone over here so that everyone can hear your question. Or you can use some of the question contact cards that are in the back of the room. So with that, we'll start it off with Supervisor Williams.
Thank you, Matt. Well, you know, when I try to describe to folks the feeling of being in Carpinteria and being a Carpinteria resident in the midst of these times, it's complicated. I know it's a complicated mix of relief that such a devastating and horrific mud flow did not strike us. Horror that such a thing could happen just to our neighbors. And a strange, slow-moving horror because so many of us didn't have internet or communication devices. So even though we were right next door, in many ways we couldn't see the images as fast as people on the other side of the world could. And then a wonder, a questioning of how much are we in danger moving forward. And I think tonight is important because generally how this has gone is if we talk about fire, you know, we barely have enough room in the auditorium. And if we talk about flood, we barely need more than a small round table with 10 chairs. And until it happens in a community. And I hope that you take tonight and spread the word because as this map is evidence of, we really dodged a bullet that night in Carpinteria. And it was only through a mix of luck and good planning that we did not face a disaster of the same magnitude. And we should not be lulled into any sense that it can't happen to us. And I know it's sometimes sad to hear a phrase like a new normal. I just hope you don't take that. That doesn't have to be disempowering. Something hasn't changed. We just sort of lulled ourselves into believing that maybe it wouldn't happen here, right? So recognition of a reality that always had a potential, but especially has this potential now that we've faced a fire of this magnitude, is not so much a new normal as much as a recognition of reality. And once we recognize that reality, we can do something about it. And so I think tonight we'll talk about, Tom is going to talk about how this community and the county responded in the past to devastating floods, and what's some of the good news of what we've learned about our debris basins and their capacity. And of course, another part of it is tonight is to figure out, well, if it can happen, what can we do about it? How can we prepare? And how can we disseminate that to the community that isn't here tonight? Because from our friends and neighbors that are agricultural workers to our visitors in this community, we need to spread that word. And my commitment to you is to try to communicate that as best as I can, to help facilitate that communication with the county, and to help that cooperative relationship that has fortunately existed with this and all disasters with the city of Carpinteria. And of course, I make that commitment not just as your supervisor, but as one of your neighbors that lives on the edge, right in that red zone that goes through Carpinteria. I'll be there with you trying to disseminate the information, but I'll also be there stacking sandbags with you too, because that's what kind of community this is. So with that, I want to turn it over to my very good friend and colleague, and someone who, if you ever need to get my ear on something, this guy has it, our mayor, Fred Shaw.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm glad to see so many people here tonight. This is, I think, going to be a very important meeting. You know, as Das said, we kind of dodged a bullet. December, we had the horrific Thomas fire, then the floods in January. We really did better, much better than Montecito did as far as the floods are concerned, and for the most part did pretty well for both of these terrible disasters. But while it would be really nice at this point to just kind of sit back and breathe a sigh of relief, we have to recognize that we're not out of the woods yet. There's still potentially a lot of rain out there. There's a lot of work that has been done to clean out debris basins and stuff like that by Tom and his crew and all these other people up here ready to speak. And the important thing for us is to listen to these people and really pay close attention, because the things that they're telling us tonight, and tell your neighbors this too, the things that they're telling us tonight, moving forwards, these are the things that are going to protect our lives, our property, and our community. And let's face it, Carpinteria is resilient, but it's always nice to get the help of the many thousands of people we've gotten help from so far. And hopefully, all together, we will come through all of this rainy season coming up and everything going forward and be even stronger for it. Thank you very much again for being here. And now I'll turn it over to Ray Navarro, our fire chief.
Good evening, everyone. During the 1-9 debris flow, the incident, Carpinteria and Summerlin were cut off from normal, feeling isolated. Communication and transportation corridors were gone. We couldn't travel in and out. First responders were conducting a search and rescue. Efforts in Montecito and Carpinteria came together as a community, and they helped out each other, demonstrating we are 805 strong. That was really, really refreshing to see. Know that Carpinteria Summerlin Fire District is part of a greater planning and collaboration effort addressing the specific needs of Carpinteria community. Planning and preparing now will build resiliency. The fire district supports the plan being communicated tonight. This will help maintain the community's strength and now and into the future. You will be hearing a lot of information about evacuation procedures, preparedness, and how the word will reach you. Please know that we, the fire district, is here for you, and we need you to do your part. To get into the heart of our program tonight, here is Director Rob Lewin.
Thank you, Chief Navarro, and I want to assure you that Chief Navarro is committed to making sure that your community is prepared as possible. He, along with the other fire chiefs in the county, all of them, are united in their efforts to make sure that this emergency that occurred and then any potential emergencies in the future are well coordinated and have the first-rate kind of response that we all would expect. All of you have been through a lot. How many of you in this room have been evacuated once or twice? And how many of you have been in evacuation warning areas? So that's all of you. You've all been affected during the fire and during the flood. And we appreciate that you are now with us tonight to learn about how to live in this new normal. And also, as you've heard, we'd like to charge you with the effort of leading your fellow neighbors in how to respond, because we need you to get the word out to all of them. The most important tool that we have available for you is the interactive map that's up on the screen. And this shows the risks associated with future storms. The thresholds of significant actions we will take to save lives and property is a storm that is expected to generate a half an inch of rain or more per hour. This is a concentrated, high-intensity rate in a short period of time. So let me repeat that. The threshold that we will use to put this plan out will be a half inch of rain per hour, not a half inch per rain per storm. It's the intensity of the rain that is most important to us in this kind of a situation. Now, that's not to say that if we had a long duration rain that was occurring over many, many days, that there also wouldn't be an impact. And we will adjust the plan to make sure that that's included as well. But it's these high-intensity rains are the ones that we need to be alert to. This map is for all recent burn areas, not just the Thomas Fire, but also the Alamo, the Sherpa, and the Whittier. This map was developed using comprehensive studies conducted by the United States Forest Service Burn Area Emergency Response Team, or known as the BEAR team, the CAL FIRE Watershed Emergency Response Team, also known as the WERT team, and the State Watershed Corps team. Our flood control district and my office, the Office of Emergency Management, was engaged in these processes throughout. Together, the efforts of each of these teams has been given to us to provide this map. This map takes into account the burn areas and the impacts of the 1-9 debris flow choke points, those areas in the channels that have the potential to leave the channels, choke points. The map will be updated as further analysis occurs. While our debris basins were successful in capturing the majority of debris from coming into the areas in and around Carpinteria, we need to consider this may not happen next time. We were fortunate. We had essentially the same amount of rain in Carpinteria's mountains as we did in Montecito's mountains. We were fortunate that we just did not have that high-intensity 5-minute rainfall, but that could change. The mountains have much more debris to give up. The mountains and the canyons are still loaded with rocks, sediment, and other debris. This is the threat we have. Understanding this, accepting it, and preparing for it is what we all must do. And I know we can. We have to agree to that. We can do this. As you all know, our immediate health and safety priorities right now are to clean the debris basins, which is what catches much of the material coming off the mountains and canyons so that we are ready for the next storm. And I assure you, and Mr. Fayram will talk about this, this is our focus every single day. So let me describe how this map works and what it is stating. So you can see the red areas are known as the extreme risk areas. If you are in an area, a piece of property located in an extreme risk area, this means that the debris flows similar to the 1-9 debris flow could impact you. Creeks that are now dry can become raging rivers of mud and rocks and other debris and could destroy property and threaten lives. Lowlands can be flooded and covered in deep mud. In the yellow areas and in the gray areas indicating the burn areas, the yellow areas indicating the areas between the creeks. If rain is predicted to be a ½ inch or more per hour, you would be at risk from being cut off from essential services like natural gas, potable water, sewer, electricity, cellular phone service, and other utilities for multiple days. Roads may become impassable and even deadly. For both areas, if rain is predicted to be a ½ inch or more per hour, you would be ordered to evacuate. So let me be clear about that. Red or yellow or gray. When we evacuate, all those areas will be evacuated. You should leave immediately and seek shelter in a location outside the evacuation areas. We now need all of you, your neighbors, your employees, everyone, to go to this interactive map and identify what the risk is. And you can access this map at readysbc.org. The map and this website are also available in Spanish. Those who only speak Spanish need to know this information. Please help spread the word to everyone who lives, works, or visits Santa Barbara County so they're knowledgeable as well. You also need to sign up for Aware and Prepare alerts. Can I take a pause here and ask for a show of hands of how many people are signed up now for Aware and Prepare alerts? That's wonderful. That's important. Make sure your neighbors are as well. Because if we can't reach you, we can't alert you. As for preparedness, there are a number of steps you should be taking now. The readysbc.org website has several tips for you, but these will vary depending on whether you have young children at home or senior citizen, work far from home. Let me mention just a few tips to give you an idea of what to think about. Keep your gas tank at least half full at all times. Keep cash available in case we lose power and ATM machines are not available. Have a suitcase or duffel bag ready to go so you don't have to think about packing under stress of an evacuation order. Keep copies or take digital photos and store them on a cloud or in a thumb drive of your prescriptions, of your key documents, and keep that in the right place. You know, we have this technology now with clouds, and if you store your material there, it doesn't matter what computer you're on, you can reach it, and you can get your prescriptions refilled. Every family member should keep a list of actions and things to gather should an evacuation order be given. Where will you meet? Who can you contact that is out of the area to let everyone in the family know the status so they can contact that person and understand how well everyone else is doing. Keep your photo albums in a plastic tub that can easily be loaded in the trunk of your car. Find a place now that's outside of the red or yellow areas where you and your family can move to for up to 2 weeks. There is much more that you can find out. To be ready, go to ready.gov or our website at readysbc.org. And now I'd like to turn the program over to the incident commander from the 1-9 debris flow, Deputy Chief Kevin Taylor from the Montecito Fire Protection District.
Thank you, Director Lewin. Now that you've had an opportunity to see the new interactive map, I would like to talk to you about what we are going to ask you to do and alert you to what emergency responders will be doing when we have a storm that's forecast to produce 1/2 inch of rain per hour. Remember, 1/2 inch of rain per hour or greater is the amount of rainfall that can cause events like the 1-9 debris flow. We generally receive a fairly accurate forecast from the National Weather Service about 72 hours before one of these storms. When that occurs, we will issue a pre-evacuation advisory to alert you of the expected storm. At this point, emergency responders from all disciplines We'll meet to review the forecast and begin to review and implement our emergency plans that were updated and refined after the 1/9 debris flow. 48 hours before the storm, if the forecaster's confidence level improves or remains unchanged, the Sheriff's Office will issue a recommended evacuation warning to give you time to plan your evacuation. At the same time, emergency responders will continue to implement our incident action plans. 24 hours before the forecast arrival of the storm, the Sheriff's Office will issue a mandatory evacuation order. This is when it is time for you and your family to leave. Emergency responders will begin pre-staging resources in the extreme and high-risk areas of the potentially affected communities. 12 hours before the forecast rain is scheduled to fall, that mandatory evacuation order will become effective. All community members should have left the area. This is when emergency responders from outside the area will begin to arrive to reinforce our local response resources. 2 hours prior to the arrival of the forecast storm, road closures will be enforced by law enforcement, and our emergency responders will be staged in several safe locations so that they're prepared to respond to those areas that are affected by the rain. As you can see, our evacuation plan has been refined since the 1/9 debris flow. Our goal is to clearly communicate to you what the risk to you and your family is, what we want you to do when an alert is issued, and where we want you to go in advance of the predicted storm. The number one thing you can do today to prepare yourself and your family is to sign up to receive life-saving alerts at readysbc.org. We all need to stay vigilant and pay very close attention to the weather. Occasionally, a rogue rain cell capable of these 1/2 inch per hour rates appears without forecast. In that event, we will issue mandatory evacuation orders and close roadways with little or no warning. Now, Sheriff Brown will explain in detail pre-evacuation advisories, recommended evacuation warnings, and mandatory evacuation orders.
Thank you, everyone. And first of all, I want to thank you all for being here this evening. All of us appreciate you being present and wanting to learn how best to prepare for future storm activity and for the potential for debris flows and evacuations. And I'm here tonight to talk to you specifically about how evacuations will be handled and what you can expect. As Montecito Fire Division Chief Kevin Taylor just explained and showed us with the new 72-hour timeline, it's imperative that when a situation becomes critical and evacuations need to be implemented, that there is a clear understanding of what you are being instructed to do, and most importantly, that you follow through these well-thought-out directions. We've developed 3 specific evacuation categories with clear definitions as to what each one means and what course of action should be taken. The 3 evacuation categories are as follows: the pre-evacuation advisory, the recommended evacuation warning, and the mandatory evacuation order. The pre-evacuation advisory means the determination has been made that you are in an area where there is a possible risk to life or property. Generally speaking, a situation is developing that you should monitor closely. If you live in an area identified as being in a pre-evacuation advisory area, please begin making preparations to leave if you are ultimately called upon to do so. It's important for you to remember that if at any time you feel threatened or you feel uncomfortable, you do not need to wait for a notification, but rather you should leave whenever you feel that way for a safer location. If you're in an area for which a recommended evacuation warning has been issued, it means that it has been determined that you are in an area where there is an extreme or high risk for the loss of life or property. If you are in a recommended evacuation warning area, the Sheriff's Office strongly encourages you to relocate to a safer location for your own safety. And while personal discretion is allowed, it is not advised. People with access or functional needs, or people who have large animals, should evacuate immediately if they receive a recommended evacuation warning. The third category is the most serious and the most urgent, the mandatory evacuation order. If you receive a mandatory evacuation order, it means that it has been determined that you are in an area where there is an extreme or high risk for loss of life and property. You may be in immediate danger from a debris flow, or you may be cut off and not have access to emergency services or utilities. In the event of a mandatory evacuation order, the Sheriff's Office will order you to relocate immediately to a safer location. Personal discretion is not an option, and a mandatory evacuation order will apply to the general public. People who do not comply with a mandatory evacuation order will not be forcibly removed, but they remain in the area at their own peril and should not expect rescue or other life-saving assistance after the onset of an emergency event. So to recap, there is a pre-evacuation advisory, which means that there's a possible risk to life or property, and you should begin making preparations to leave. There's the recommended evacuation warning, which means there is an extreme or high risk to life and property, and you are strongly advised to relocate to a safer location. And there's the mandatory evacuation order, which means that there is an extreme or high risk to life and property, and you are instructed to leave immediately. To review those definitions or for a copy of them, please go to readysbc.org. Again, that website is readysbc.org. I want to again emphasize something that Director Lewin mentioned, and that is how vulnerable the South County areas are due to the burn scar and the damaged condition of our watershed. It's going to take less rain the next time to move debris than it did this last time. And it's important for everyone to understand the seriousness of this issue and to have a clear understanding of evacuation categories and instructions. It's also important to note that even if you are not living in an extreme or high-risk area, you could be placed under a recommended evacuation warning or a mandatory evacuation order because there's a potential for access to the area to be blocked and for you to be cut off from emergency and basic services. I want to again emphasize that although we will do our very best to adhere to the 72-hour timeline that we presented to you this evening, we may have to accelerate the evacuation progression in the event of a rogue storm, a higher than forecasted rainfall, or an unforecasted weather event. If you live in an area of extreme risk, a red zone, you may have to evacuate immediately to higher ground if you get such a warning. That could mean moving laterally, east or west, to a higher elevation, such as a neighbor's home or some other type of temporary shelter. Or it could mean that you should shelter in place by going to an upper floor in your home or even getting on top of a kitchen or bathroom counter. These new evacuation definitions will be used for both storm and fire events, and you should become familiar with each one of them and know what is expected of you. You should also know whether you live or you work in an area that is of extreme or high risk. And again, that's the interactive map. The county has printed booklets with the evacuation definitions, the 72-hour evacuation timeline, the debris flow map, and how to sign up for aware and prepare alerts. Deputies have been passing these booklets out to the residents in Montecito and Carpinteria, and they are available here tonight in the back of the room. We recommend that you read this information and that you put it somewhere where it is both visible and accessible. Having a personal and family plan, including identifying where you will go in the event of an evacuation, is of the utmost importance. You will have to either go north or south in the event of an evacuation, either to a friend or family member's home, a hotel, or a Red Cross evacuation shelter. I want to thank you for your attention this evening. Preparation and planning are key factors in living through any future events of this nature, and your presence here is an important step in protecting yourself, your family, and your neighbors. One of our key partners is the California Highway Patrol, and Lieutenant Larson is here tonight to describe the CHP's action under the scenarios we've just outlined for you, especially as it regards Highway 101.
Thank you, Sheriff Brown, and good evening. Closure of Highway 101 and any on-ramps will occur 2 hours prior to the arrival of a serious storm. We want you to be able to use Highway 101 to depart in the impacted area. A 72-hour pre-evacuation advisory, a 48-hour evacuation warning, a 24-hour mandatory evacuation orders will be completed prior to the closure. Working with the Sheriff's Department, we will strive to clearly announce to the public the status regarding Highway 101 closure times and locations. In case of a serious storm that threatens life and property, we will close the northbound 101 at SR 150 or Rincon Road and southbound 101 at the Milpas Road on-ramp and off-ramp in the city of Santa Barbara. You will want to determine if your goals is to be north or south of this closure. So please make your travel plans in advance of the closure. Please know, in the event of a rogue storm or an unforecasted weather event, we may need to close the roadways immediately. Lastly, please remain attentive and continue to monitor emergency alerts and media announcements. Thank you. Now welcome Tom Farram from the Santa Barbara County Flood Control District.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to have some pictures to show you some of the work that's going on and some of the impacts that have occurred. So if we go to the next slide. We all know that the importance of clearing out debris basins and channels that run through the community. Please know that before 1/9 debris flow, that each one of the 11 debris basins below the Thomas Fire were completely cleaned out. They were literally in pristine condition because we knew that if serious rain fell on this destroyed watershed above us, the debris basins would be put to their test, and they were. Since 9/1, the County Flood Control District, Army Corps of Engineers with FEMA as our partners and the state of California, has continued the recleaning of these debris basins so that we can be as prepared as possible for the next storm. Next slide. Much progress has occurred, and in fact, 10 of the 11 debris basins are now completely cleared. We are 80% complete total. Including this one, which is Gubernador debris basin. Gubernador debris basin, just after the debris flow. You can see the rocks, and the picture doesn't do it justice. Those rocks are the size of buses in some cases that literally had to be broken up, and that basin stopped those. And then after clean out, not too long ago here. However, Santa Monica debris basin, has everybody seen the lights up on the hill? Looks like a football stadium with a football game, only it's not the Warriors playing, it's the Santa Monica debris basin being cleaned out. The Corps of Engineers are working on that debris basin 24/7, and still they're just about 50%, a little over 50% done. So a lot of work has to be done. But keep in mind, it's a large basin, and so 50% is good news with the size of that. Next slide. So much of Carpinteria was spared from the damages and peril of the debris flow that affected Montecito area. A lot of this is due and thanks to the Carpinteria Valley Watershed Project, which was a federal project by the Soil Conservation Service, now called the Natural Resources Conservation Service. This project, which include a very large debris basin on Santa Monica Creek and channel lining of Santa Monica and Franklin Creek channels, which you've all no doubt have seen, was built in the 70s and early 80s. And in fact, I want to recognize Mr. Doug Tays right here in the front row, who is now retired in Santa Barbara, but spent his career with the NRCS. His wife still works for the NRCS, and he worked on that project in the 70s and 80s. So I invited him to be here. And so if there's any questions about that, technically, he could probably answer some of those better than I could after the meeting, of course. Next slide, please. In comparison to 1969, most of Carpinteria fared better in this storm. How many were here in 1969? So you know what I'm talking about. In fact, if it weren't for this major project, we might not be having this meeting in this room because this very campus was significantly impacted. And this campus was impacted by Santa Monica Creek because Santa Monica Creek is on an alluvial fan, and when it jumps its banks, it comes through here on its way to Carpinteria. Next slide. So here's Santa Monica debris basin as it looked just before the storms. Actually, just before we had even cleaned it out, because some of the vegetation you see in the back had all been removed. As I mentioned, all these debris basins were whistle clean. But what if it were not there for this storm? We go to the next slide. That was a couple days after. You can't see the towers. The debris is estimated 50 feet deep. The mat of trees, and those aren't just branches, those are entire trees, were completely like forming a mat on the top of that basin. The basin did spill, and it did send a lot of water and some debris downstream, but it stopped all of that. I think there's another picture. This is a aerial picture before and after. In fact, we're going to have a video at the end that Lyle Wagnick took. So at the top, again, that was taken just after the fire. The vegetation you see in there was cleared out before the flow. And then that was, the bottom picture is a couple days into the clean out. Next picture. I wanted to show this too because as you look at this debris basin, this was shortly after the flood as well, or the debris flow. You can see the rock in that channel upstream. And if you get down on the ground there, enormous boulders completely lining that channel. And that's what Director Lewin was talking about. The material has not stopped coming. It's there. And it's all the way up in most of these channels and ready to keep coming down. So it's important to know that that's ready. But we'll also have that basin, if not completely cleaned, a significant portion of it cleaned before that next storm. Next slide. And finally, just recently, a couple days ago, this shows some of the work that was being done by the Corps of Engineers, and significant work has even occurred since that picture. It seems like they're picking up speed as we move along. Next slide. Carpinteria Salt Marsh. So Carpinteria Salt Marsh is the recipient of the flows out of the Santa Monica watershed and also the Franklin watershed. And after the 1/9 debris flow, the marsh was almost completely silted in its channels. And so we immediately mobilized cranes to start digging that material out. And that is really important because if you look back on the map, if the Carpinteria Salt Marsh can't take that flow, then it overflows into the city as well from the bottom instead of from the top down. So it's really important we keep the Carpinteria Salt Marsh clean. And we also have a little piece of that still has to be cleaned out where our cranes couldn't get. And we're looking at ways of doing that potentially with a floating hydraulic dredge like we've done in Goleta Slough. So we'll have to determine if that's feasible. Finally, in conclusions, we avoided some pretty horrific damage that would have certainly happened if we didn't have the Santa Monica and the Franklin project. And for that, we're thankful. Santa Monica debris basin was the hero. It took the brunt of this storm, and it was damaged. It was a damaged facility that we're repairing, and however, it did its job. It was designed for this storm, and it did its job. And then management of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh ongoing is going to be essential also to the protection of Carpinteria. And so you will see us out there throughout the winter as needed if we have to remove more sediment. So lastly, I also mentioned we installed 6 new rain gauges in the area below the Thomas Fire and also out on the islands. I think that is Santa Rosa Island, which will better be able to determine the rainfall coming from the south, which was what the storm on 1/9 did. And now, do we have the next slide? Well, there's a close-up of that, of those rain gauges. Those rain gauges, by the way, are real-time. As it rains, it comes directly into our office. You can see that rainfall on our website at rain.cospw.net. That's rain@cospw.net. And it also goes to the National Weather Service directly in Oxnard. And the National Weather Service uses all of our rainfall data for all of their warning products. And now I think we're ready for the drone flight. That's going on as we speak with the lights. You can just see the upper tower right there in the upper left. Look at the rock in the channel. That was not there before this storm. And there's denuded hillside with an endless supply of rock. Okay, now I'd like to introduce to discuss the health impacts of the county's public health officer, Dr. Charity Dean.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Dean. I'm the public health officer for Santa Barbara County. And I want to say a few words about dust and air quality because this has been a concern that we've heard about. The main health effect that we worry about with dust, and this can be with the dry dust that's blowing up from mud as it's being cleaned up, is really a respiratory difficulty breathing or exacerbation of asthma or underlying respiratory conditions. So for sensitive groups, this is something that you should think about. If you have underlying health conditions like asthma or emphysema, young children, pregnant women, those with heart conditions, those are the people that are more likely to be adversely affected by dust in the air. It causes an irritation of the mucous membranes, dry, itchy eyes, dry throat. We've received questions about what kind of germs could be present in the dust that you could be infected with. And the answer is that some of the bacteria that were a concern in the wet mud are not traditionally transmitted by inhaling the dry dust. So you may have heard about the fecal coliforms. That is not something that we are concerned about that you could get infected with by breathing in the dust. The germ that is possible in the dust is called coccidioides. And again, we don't traditionally think about cocci or valley fever being transmitted by breathing in just dust in the air. It's usually from a wind event over a dry desert area. However, it's possible. So I want to encourage people who are concerned about the dust that might be around Carpinteria to think about wearing an N95 mask. We all got really familiar with these during the Thomas Fire. And wearing an N95 mask is the best way to protect yourself from breathing in the dust. Also, please be aware that leaf blowers should not be used during dusty conditions. That's very important to protect the health of those around us. Next slide. The Air Quality Index is an index that we look to tell us the amount of particulate matter in the air, the very tiny particulate matter that may be invisible. You can check hourly results on ourair.org. It's run by the Air Pollution Control District. And there is a new monitoring station that was put up in Montecito on February 2nd. It's at the corner of San Ysidro Road and East Valley Road. So you can check that monitoring station online on their website, again, ourair.org. And then you can also look at the monitoring station that's been present here in Carpinteria. And I'll stay around if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dean. That concludes our presentation portion of tonight's presentation. And at this time, I would be happy to entertain some questions. If you have questions, if you can make your way over here to the microphone, a couple at a time, and we'll see if we can get the right answers for you.
That guy. You didn't mention is it a Royal Paradon? That was all.
Okay. Your question was, I didn't mention a Royal Paradon. Yes, a Royal Paradon was cleaned out before the storm. It did fill, as they all did. It did sustain damage, which is being repaired, and it has since been cleaned out. I also didn't mention Franklin debris basin. Also, same thing. Was cleaned out. It filled. Has been cleaned out. Franklin did not get damage. Is that right, John? Looking at John Fry, did Franklin suffer damage or not? No damage to Franklin, so we're in good shape there. And with the case of Gobernador, it suffered superficial damage to fencing, but the structure is solid, so we're in good shape there. The capacity of a Royal Paradon, say, compared to Santa Monica? John, capacity of a Royal Paradon? About 25,000? Oh, it's 25%, so that's closer to 50. Closer to 50,000 then. A little less than that. Could you pull my? The first slide. The first slide of mine. There we go. No, go up. Go up. There we go. Okay. So here's Santa Monica. There's the Royal Paradon. Gobernador is right over here. Franklin right here. I'm sorry, Santa Monica. Santa Monica, Franklin, Gobernador, Royal Paradon. That map doesn't really do justice. Should I stay or not?
No, you're good. I want to really thank the Army Corps of Engineers, because our town would have been blown up like in '69 because of that debris. If that basin wasn't up there, all that 50-foot deep would have been in Carpinteria. So my hat's off to them. But I wanted to talk about two things. One which impacted me. I live up in Serena Park and Toro Canyon area, and we were cut off north and south because of the two creeks that shut 101 in the one area and on the other one. The other creek didn't breach. But we were expecting a second storm, right? Remember that day? It was supposed to come at 3 in the morning, and I had left to try to get some supplies, try to get home. The communication, Doss, you talked about the communication. Our cell phones didn't work. We rely on those to get alerts and everything else. Internet didn't work. Power was out. What happened to the radio? I have a transistor radio in my little safety kit, right, for earthquake preparedness. We don't have, is there a county, anything to be done by the county to have a county radio station? Or is there, and in the event of an emergency, you can go to this channel? Because the communication, there was none.
Thank you, sir, for the question about better use of radio. Sort of going back to the old school methods when we run out of using our normal media. So we do have a program called Radio Ready, and we have some information on our website on that. That said, it's not as good as it used to be when we had disc jockeys working in radio stations regularly and all of that. So, but we do have a commitment from 6 radio stations, I believe, that are committed to participating in delivering message during emergencies. And I agree that we probably need to do a much better job about getting those particular radio station frequencies out to the public for situations like you're talking about. We were very fortunate, as you know, throughout the whole emergency to have essentially nonstop coverage by KEYT, and much of KSBY spent time on it. So we had a tremendous support from the television stations, and I think a lot of you were all relying on that information.
Well, we couldn't get it.
You couldn't get it because you didn't have
TV.
cable.
We didn't have TV.
I have antenna at my house. I'd recommend that as well.
Okay.
So buy yourself a bunny ears antenna and put that up.
Well, that's good that you're paying attention to that.
Yeah, I'll say that not only, obviously this didn't work in many cases, but people, while I served you for 6 years in the state legislature, I went deep into really the dirty baggage around cell to 911. And a cellular phone is not a good tool, in my opinion, to rely upon. Its location accuracy is getting worse over time, not better. So meaning first responders have a hard time finding you with the cell phone, whereas a landline, they know where you are. And it's much easier for that to go out. And so I think you're on a really good path, which is we should rely on multiple forms of communication. And one of those is going back to copper landlines from Frontier. They did not sponsor this message. It's just the safest way to contact emergency personnel. You know, I had a landline, but unfortunately I had a cable landline, and that was, you know, not as good, right? And cable was out for most of us, right? And I also came to rely on radio to get the message out to folks. I started just going on K-Lite once a day to try to get the message out, because that was the only way that many of us in Carpinteria or Montecito could get any information.
Yeah, well, now I know, and you guys recognize the problem, so I appreciate that. And then one other question for the CHP. When I was trying to get home, there was a section from Santa Claus Lane to Padaro Lane off-ramp that they were shuttling us up because I had to try to get home. And there were a lot of people from LA and a lot of people. Is there any way to get Google Maps or Waze when we have a disaster like this to shut down their stuff? Because I got a call from a friend of mine. He said, no, I can go up 192 and all the way through. Is there any way that can happen? Okay, thanks.
So I wanted to chime in also on that. We have traffic meetings now several times a week, just on how we're going to deal with all the traffic congestion that you all have been impacted here in Carpinteria as well as Montecito, and everybody on 101 with the loss of Highway 192 because of the bridge closures. That very question about, is there a way to work with these smartphone apps that provide map tools? They have put the closures of the bridges on those. So those are, we no longer have the issue of people trying to use 192 anymore using those. But of course, that puts everybody else onto 101. And then in many cases, it's rediverting them through Carpinteria and it's diverting them through Montecito. So some of the efforts that Caltrans and the Highway Patrol have done to try to alleviate that, as you can see, there's now signage on 101 that says stay on the freeway, essentially. They're trying to make sure people are not getting off to try to work that part of it. We need everybody to do that. Some of the other things that we're trying to do now is we're looking at providing better train service. That's something that we're going to try and changing the times on that, and I think you're going to hear more about that soon. We're looking at I'll let the supervisor update more on that if you could. We're also looking at trying to figure out some traffic changing systems, whether we can reorient how the off-ramps are with, at San Ysidro and some of those ones inside, so that maybe there's some temporary work that we can do. But we know this is actually a long-term problem. that all of us are on. And I want to assure you that your city here in Carpinteria is engaged in all of that conversation and have made us well aware of the impacts on Carpinteria. So we're looking at this very regionally and trying to come up with solutions that are not going to just be fixes for a little while, but fixes until the bridges are fixed on 192, and that could take even up to a couple of years to do. So we appreciate everybody's patience with this one, and please know we're working hard on this issue.
So the scheduled, I know all of us have been talking about commuter rail for, I don't know, 10 years, right? The retiming of the Amtrak train is supposed to start April 2nd. That is, right now you can take one into the about 10 in the morning, but not all jobs will let you roll into work at 10:30. And so this will be a much earlier train. It may be really early, like 6:45 or 7 o'clock. But that's thus far we have had a decent amount of demand in our commuter buses at that time. So we expect that to work at least for some, and we are applying for a grant through SBCAG for a second one of those, meaning that would be the 6th train of the day instead of just 5 trains a day. So. Yeah, I should have included that. There's a lot of preparation work going on around that along first and last mile service. For us here in Carpinteria, first mile service isn't that bad because we can just walk to the train station. But when you're in Santa Barbara, they're arranging some buses to get from the train station to other locations. They're also doing that in Goleta, which is maybe even more important because of the job center right close to the train station. And they're setting up bike lockers in each one of the train stations too.
Hi. First, I'd just like to thank you for your extraordinary efforts. And it's just mind-boggling how much you've had to do and deal with. I live just up the road on Foothill, right below the Santa Monica Basin, and we're heavily impacted by the nonstop trucks. It's almost impossible sometimes to get out of our driveway, and of course the dust is just it's everywhere. So I'm just wondering what the timetable is for. You mentioned you're about halfway completed with the project. What's the timetable for completion? Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And we're aware of these impacts to the neighbors up there. Part of the problem is, because of the damage to 192, there really are 2 ways out. And that's unfortunate, but it's what we have. They are working 24 hours a day, as you know. Some people don't like that they're working 24 hours a day, but we will get done faster if we continue at that pace. And right now, the scheduled completion is March 15th. Now, I will say that the last couple days, they've been doing pretty good on their volume total, so I hope it's better. Now, as for the dust, and also had some questions about safety with all the trucks, including here in front of the high school. We communicate frequently with the Corps of Engineers, and we will continue to do that because obviously with a basin of that size, there are a lot of trucks involved, so a lot of drivers. And so it's a constant constant correction to try to get everything done right. And as for the dust, we'll talk to the Corps about that and see if there's anything that can be done to improve that. But be assured we're working as fast as we can to get this done and get out of your hair. Not only get out of your hair, but to get that basin ready for the next storm.
Hello. My question's about the Gobernador Canyon Basin. And as you can see in the photographs, the basin did a great job of stopping rocks, for which we're really grateful. We're the first property below the basin. But unlike the Santa Monica Basin, there was no mat of tree debris. Those trees seemed to flow right out, hit the bridge on our property, and ended up damming things up and lodging in many orchards. down along Gobernador Creek. And so the Army Corps and their subcontractors are in there for 3 weeks, maybe. Terrific group. Really appreciated all the work that they did. But I'm wondering if there were design changes as well as cleanup so that when this does happen, as you say, there's still a lot of debris up there, it'll be catching tree debris as well as the boulders.
Yeah, so the design of the Santa Monica Basin is significantly different than the other basins. And what you saw at Gobernador with the trees coming over is similar to what we saw in most of the other debris basins. And what happened in those other debris basins is the weir, they didn't just spill. Debris basins do spill over their spillway. They were completely overtopped. And so all of that stuff is in the upper layer, including some rocks are in the upper layer because they actually float on that debris flow, bypass the debris basin, including Gobernador. And that's a function of just the size and the height of it. Santa Monica being as big as it is with that side spillway with the veins that go around stopped a lot more of that trees that came down. We're going to be looking at all of our debris basins as we move forward to look at, is there optimization? But I have to be honest with you, the woody debris is particularly difficult because it floats and it's on the upper level of that flow, and when a basin spills, it will go out. I note your comment, and we are aware of that. That was a common problem throughout the whole area, was the trees.
Hi, I'm a teacher at Aliso School, which is right smack dab in the middle of that red zone. And just on the other side of the railroad tracks, we have the salt marsh. And I'm just and it's right on Franklin Creek. And I'm wondering, in the case of one of those rogue storms where there's immediate evacuation, if parents might not be able to get to their children, and we don't have second levels at that school, so I don't know if we should have ladders, or I'm not quite sure what the plan is. I know that everyone's really working hard on it, and I appreciate that, but just I'm wondering what the debris flow might look like. Is it coming from the salt marsh? Is it coming from the creek? What is our plan of action there?
So I'm not going to take on the issue of what the particular flooding issues are. I'll let Mr. Fayram work on that one. Generally, though, I guess in lowland areas, you're going to be seeing more of water and mud as opposed to rocks, because they will eventually fall out. But I'll let him chime in on that if there's more to add. Let me talk a little bit about schools, since we're in a school right now that is in the red zone as well. And we have met with both the schools in the Carpinteria district as well as the schools in Montecito. We met with both private and public schools. And we are continuing to work with them with the idea of updating their emergency plans, which all schools have for varieties of emergencies. We've asked them to add a debris flow to that emergency plan. Essentially, there are 4 types of things that schools now need to consider. One is the storm that is predicted, and schools not in session when we were able to do the evacuation. So they merely just need to close the school and tell everyone to stay at home, and using their notification systems. And that's essentially what happened for the 1-9 debris flow. Is we did the evacuation 30 hours before the schools had noticed everyone to not come to school that following Monday, and then Tuesday, of course. The next kind of storm that they need to be concerned about is the one that has little notice, that the students are in school. There's little notice because it is a rogue storm. And in those cases, what we need the schools to do is to prepare for a shelter in place, to identify, and your facilities, who's the gentleman in charge of facilities was at the meeting and is going to be looking at this, where the students are going to be safest in those locations. And then also to notify the parents to not come to the school, because what we don't want is parents to get on the road during a storm, during a debris flow. We want them to shelter in place as well, and then come later when we can get them safely there. The next type of plan that the schools need is a plan where they have notice, but it's not a lot of notice. It may be hard to get enough buses together to evacuate the children to a safer location. So we want them to plan how to evacuate the children out of the school as quickly as possible to a safer location outside the zones. And then, of course, the other one is we give them plenty of time. They have time to call the parents, and the parents can come and pick up their children. So there's 4 essential parts to this plan. The schools receive this information, and I know they're working on it, and they've even invited us to come meet with all of the principals and other leaders at each individual school. So we're prepared to do whatever we need to do to make sure that our students are safe.
I'm concerned that not enough attention is given to the danger that the Peridot Aurora presents us on Cravens Lane in the Sandpiper Mobile Home Park and the Franciscan condos. Sunday, before the Monday rains were predicted, I got a concern call from the director of hospice wanting to know what my evacuation plan was for my 105-year-old mother the following day. And I thought, so what I did, I was confused. I could not assess the danger in the neighborhood where we were at. So what I did, and my brother, we looked at Google Earth. We tried to get maps, and we tried to course. We learned about the Peridot Aurora, and we tried to course its waterway. I drove 192 trying to identify where every drainage area was, and I drove Toro Canyon Park Road, and I drove Toro Canyon Road and Ladera Lane, and when I saw that all those areas with the hills and the valleys had not been burned, because I didn't know Toro Canyon had not been burned, I thought, oh, we're safe. No problem. So after the 1/9 flood, I went up initially to the top of Cravens Lane and walked on private property, and I looked at where that creek came through the mountain that wasn't burned. And it was like looking at a 6-lane highway. And I thought, wow, this is cool. I can walk all the way through the mountain over to Toro Canyon Park. And so but I noticed that when it comes through the gap of the mountain and it veers westward, its natural course would be to come down Cravens Lane. And the only thing that stopped it from coming down Cravens Lane was about 3 feet. So I was shocked, and I thought, oh my goodness, in a larger rain event, that creek would create its own channel down the Cravens Lane area and impact us lower as the 1969 flood did before that those areas were developed. Now also after the flood, although I wasn't supposed to, I drove back on Toro Canyon Park Road again to the inn, and on a Saturday, and I saw the debris basin, and took pictures of the equipment working, and I was impressed because there was 2 porta potties. So I knew that someone was taking that debris basin seriously. There were work crews there. But again, I was really shocked to see the water flow that came from Camino Cielo down over in Oil Canyon, over Park Canyon Road, which eventually ended up with us. I felt quite dramatic, very dramatic. And I guess you all know that during the rains at 4 in the morning, our residents heard massive explosions as big boulders. Where they came from, I don't know. Top of the mountain? I don't know. Where did those boulders come from? Crashed into the bridge at 192, wrecking that bridge, and then it went down and and damaged Gallopin Stripling's orchid, closed the freeway and went down to Padero Lane, and that area, there's still standing water that's a breeding ground for mosquitoes in the ditch on the side of the railroad trains. So I'm concerned in a greater rain event that we're in far more danger in all of Carpinteria than we know. Fortunately, I saw some Facebook posting of a local resident. All I know, his name is Mike Bowden. I don't know if he's here today. And he posted pictures of the 1969 floods, and he listed the damage that was done at that time, 240 homes on both sides of 101 destroyed from the Santa Monica Creek. I think a great deterrent or a wake-up call for Carpinteria people would be more coverage of the 1969 flood. And I think disseminating some of the pictures of that event would have Carpinteria residents thinking, wow, Montecito could happen here.
Thank you. Certainly this last 1-9 debris flow has taught us a lot of things about the potential for the rain and the mud and the debris flows. And we've got a team of folks that are coming to help us do some land mapping. And we've got our FEMA partners helping us with creeks and the charting of the creeks to make sure that the flood mapping maps are accurate. And we've got a lot of folks dedicated to making sure that we understand what the last storm did and how it relates to the conditions on the ground throughout Carpinteria, Montecito, and Summerlin. So we've got a lot of studying to do. Next question.
Little word, and that is in the Sandpiper Mobile Home Park. We developed a Facebook page where we're going to communicate with each other and share information like the meeting. That's how I learned of the meeting tonight.
That's
about
excellent.
An hour ago.
Thank you. That's excellent. Next question.
On previous construction projects, the larger trucks weren't allowed on Cravens, and now it's the preferred route, it appears. And there's just no way for them to turn around at the top or to turn at the top. So I'm not sure how that occurred, that Cravens is now acceptable. That has never been the case before. That road is only 20 feet wide at the most, and it's curved on the sides.
So one of the things that's been a concern for our team for the last, well, since the 1-9 debris flow, has been traffic and safety. And we've been worked hard with all of our partners, Highway Patrol, our local sheriff's office, and the residents to better understand the roads and the system of a network of roads and the capacity of the roads. It started really with evaluation and clearing of the roads, trying to get the debris off the roads to open up the arteries so that we could get Army Corps in there and start working on those debris basins and start cleaning up the creek channels. And as we moved to repopulate Montecito, traffic concern was one of the higher priorities. Putting all the folks back in their homes and in the community and in the businesses that have been away for so long, mixed with the construction trucks, the large trucks coming in and out of those small, windy roads. And so, as Director Lewin talked about earlier, we have a transportation group, and it's a group of all your local experts and some others that are working together to address things like that. And as Director Lewin also said earlier, this is going to be a long-term event for us all. And our quieter streets of Montecito, Summerlin, and Carpinteria are not used to the truck traffic. So we're very concerned about the safety, and we want to make sure that as we continue to refine that transportation plan, that we're looking at all of those things, the road widths, and seeing if there's better ways to move the traffic in and out, and especially around our commuter traffic in the mornings and evenings. So thank you for your comment. Right.
I can only say that we've gone to bat on this. I'll tell you that we've struck out thus far at the suggestion of another local resident, John Fry, on our behalf at flood control, pitched to FEMA the idea of only going one way on Cravens and doing a loop, sending trucks down one street and the other way down another. And FEMA looked at that and said that rejected it because they did not feel like it would be efficient for their operation. But so we've got, that's as far as it's gotten thus far.
Okay, anyone have any other questions? If not, got another question? Okay, Mr. Fayram. The question was about the dredge in the salt marsh. What's the status of that? What's going to happen next?
Okay, so as I mentioned, the cranes that you saw working there can only get down to the confluence of those two channels, and below that, you can't get a crane in there. So the only option is a floating hydraulic dredge that would then discharge out by the marsh point there. I'll look to John. John, do we have a bid opening date for when we're going to go out to bid and open on that yet? Do you know of a date? Yeah. Okay, so the next couple days we'll go out to bid. This is a specialized piece of work, so we just don't go hire a local contractor because some of these dredges actually have to be moved in from long distances. But we are certainly aware of the problem, and we have the permits in place to do the work, and so it'll be something that we'll be moving along. The other thing I just want to notice, let the other comment know about 69 floods that talked about that after the meeting. This is a book that's on our website. It's called 69 Floods, and it has a lot of pictures of Carpinteria you should look at. So when that's done there, I think the gentleman had a question.
So the question about San Ysidro, the trail you're talking about, the hiking trails, you can be assured that the trails are going to be closed for a while as the Forest Service has done a burn area emergency response report, which is I think available on the Los Padres website, and in there there'll be information about what is going to be needed to put their trail system back, the mitigation measures that they're going to have to do. But in the areas that had the fire burned at such high intensity, it was really hard on their trail systems, and so it could be a while before they're able to get those trails back. I don't want to try to answer that, but I would make a call to the Los Padres Forest for sure. I'm sure they'd be glad to discuss that with you. We are going to get all three. Sorry, you had some information?
Sure. Yeah, I've talked to the Los Padres Ranger District about this, and there's been some sort of private, public discussion about this, and I would err on the side of years. I would say that we should be looking at doing our hiking more down here and more in Santa Barbara, because it's not only that these trails are completely destroyed, but it's pretty dangerous. There's an enormous amount of rock and debris up there, and strange things can happen. I think one of the stories that was passed on was of a hiker that went deep on Franklin, right? Our trail right here, and found an amount of rock scree, and picked out one little stick, sticking in, and half the scree went tumbling down the hill. There's a lot of stuff like that, a lot of injuries possible, and they're not suggesting people go back in there. In fact, they're telling people they shouldn't be.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so that concludes. Thank you, everybody.